good evening and welcome to our OKS Kings Talk with former Walpole and Grange boy, Giancarlo Sciama. As most of you will know, my name is Greg Hunter and I'm the Deputy Head Co-Curricular here at Kings. We are privileged to welcome back Giancarlo to Kings, albeit in this online format, to present Catalogue, the Art of the Album Reissue. Giancarlo left Kings in 1992, studied Italian and French at UCL before moving into the music industry, which was his real love. He spent 18 years at major record companies, including Universal and EMI. He was Vice President, Global Marketing Repertoire at Universal, as well as the international at EMI, as well as part of the international catalogue. He has now his own independent consultancy firm for the last 5 years or so and has worked on heritage catalogues, including the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Rolling Stones, you name it. If they've been in the music industry, they've worked with Giancarlo. Tonight, conducting the Q&A is our own Kings rock band legend and current Galpin's head of house, Louis Smeaton. So please, at any stage, either type your question into the Q&A function as part of Zoom, or alternatively, once the presentation's finished, you can put your virtual hand up and we can put you live on the air to ask your question yourself. And now it is with great pleasure that I hand over to both Louis and Giancarlo. Louis, it's over to you. Thank you very much.
Giancarlo, thank you very much for joining us today. There's a lot of excitement about this talk, so really appreciate you taking your time. Just before we get onto your presentation, I just wanted to ask you if you could tell us anything about your time at Kings, any particular memories, and kind of how it led up to you doing what you're doing today.
Sure. I remember the weekend before I came to Kings, or the day before or something, my dad told me that, like, a special treat, buy me an album from the local record shop. So we trotted down there and I decided I liked the look of what turned out to be Prince's Sign of the Times, which had come out a few months earlier. And it's funny because that album has sort of stayed with me through my whole life ever since. But I then really got into music, I guess, while I was at Kings just generally. But when I was 15 or so in the fifth year, I started learning to play the drums through a sheer coincidence of when I was in Walpole, which was my house back then. I had a study with another guy who'd been kicked out of Galpin's or Schoolhouse, I don't remember. And I walked into my study in break time, and our room had a chimney in it, which was quite handy, obviously, for certain reasons. To find a upper sixth boy smoking a cigarette in there who I'd never met. So I was duly outraged and demanded to know what he was going to do for me. And it transpired that he was like the school drummer. And he said, well, my drum kit's set up on the Shirley Hall stage, and you can play it whenever you like, as long as I'm not using it. So that kind of got me into drums, and I taught myself the drums from then and wanted to be in bands and be a rock star, which didn't quite work out. But in the end, sort of my second place scenario was getting into a record company. And after I left university, I'd sort of worked really hard in bars, saved up, and somehow just blagged my way into the business. And then in October 98, I got a work experience gig for 6 weeks at Universal Music, and 6 weeks turned into 9 years, and then I went on from there.
Awesome. So yeah, if you'd like to crack on with your presentation, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end.
Sure, thanks very much. Can you see that?
Yeah, that's all good.
Cool. So that's me. And in case you hadn't been listening clearly, I am a catalogue music consultant, and I have the great privilege of consulting for 2 clients, for Universal Music and for Warner Music. In case you're not aware, those are 2 of the 3 major record companies in the world right now. So before I get into kind of what I do and how I do it, I thought I'd just explain what the word catalogue means, because it may not be entirely obvious. So music at record companies, I should say, first of all, there are record companies and there are publishing companies. Record companies' rights, the thing they own is the recorded music, i.e. the tapes. And music publishing companies own the intellectual property rights to the songs and the music. So I'm in recorded music, which is sort of split into two fields, which is frontline, which is anything that's new by a current signed artist, and catalogue, which is basically all the old stuff. But so to really explain catalogue properly, I'm going to give you a very quick blast through the musical past. So that dude there that you see on your screen is a gentleman called Emil Berliner, who was a German American, and Emil Berliner in the late 1880s filed US patents for that, the phonograph and the phonograph player. In other words, he's the guy that invented the record. And incidentally, he then went on to found Deutsche Grammophon, which is still to this day the #1 record label for classical music and opera. So he kind of sort of founded the first record company. By the 1950s, 7-inch singles were all the rage. And the catchy, radio-friendly 2.5-minute pop song was it. So it was all Elvis Presley and over here Cliff Richard and stuff like that. And artists with any kind of shelf life basically had to put together hit after hit after hit after hit. And the second you didn't have a hit, you were out. And the technology of the 7-inch coupled with radio made music this huge new cultural phenomenon for young people, and rock and roll was born from there, really. So by the time you get to the 60s, singles are still huge, but suddenly the album starts kicking in as a really important artistic phenomenon in the mid-60s. And so while you had others, the Beach Boys and the Beatles really changed how that was happening, in the sense that the Beatles stopped touring and decided they were going to be a studio band. They camped out at Abbey Road and worked with George Martin, and they literally pioneered sound and the way it was used and effects and recording techniques. And they were very much in competition with the Beach Boys over in the States at Capitol Studios. But that became kind of the template of what an artist could really do, how they could really express themselves. It wasn't just about 2 tracks on a single, even though they still did that themselves. But an album gave you a much bigger palette and a much bigger canvas on which to paint. And then you get through to Zeppelin in the late 60s, in 69, who refused to release singles. If you wanted the Led Zeppelin song, you had to buy the LP. So from thenceforth, it was all about albums. And those are some of the best-selling albums of all time you see on your screen. Michael Jackson Thriller has sold 35 million records worldwide. The Beatles' Hotel California is up there. AC/DC Back in Black. Led Zeppelin 4 was notable because it was the first time an artist had not put their name on a record sleeve. No text at all. It was just the record, as you see there. And then some notable other ones like Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, which spent something ridiculous like 1 billion years in the album charts in America after it was released. I think it first dropped out of the album charts in 1990 something. And then Bob Marley Legend, which is probably the best of there is, I think. So albums then become the thing that really counts. And those are the artists, more or less, give or take, or a good many of them, that have sold the most albums in the history of music. And I've been very lucky to have the privilege of working on a few of those names and their catalogues. But those albums and those artists were signed to a multitude of record labels. And in the 70s and 80s, these were pretty much all independent record labels. But now, all of those labels are owned by these 3 majors, which is a pretty crazy thing. And those 3 major record companies have a 61% market share as of 2020. their combined revenue for 2020 was $15 billion, which really goes to show how much money there is in music. And it is estimated that catalogue, quote unquote, which is defined as anything older than 2 years, is responsible for 73% of that money. So it's kind of a good area of the business to be in, because in the end, you're where the money is. So if it's helpful, I thought I'd just talk you through how I got to do what I do. So as I mentioned, having left university in '97, I kind of saved up, bartended, worked lots and lots to get money in the bank and try and break my way into the industry. And at the end of '98, I got a 6-week work experience placement at Universal, MCA Universal International. And that 6-week thing turned into 6 months. And then I got offered a job as a personal assistant to the vice president of Catalogue, who, by the way, was the guy who got me in to do the work experience gig. And he went to King's Rochester, and he thought it'd be nice to order a boy from King's School around, from King's School Canterbury. So there you go. A year later, he basically said to me, look, you can only do the PA job for a year because otherwise you just get stuck doing that rubbish. And a job came up at Universal in Italy to be a product manager in the catalogue department. So they said, would you like to move out to Milan and do that? And I was like, of course I'd like to move to Milan to do that. Thank you very much. And it turned out I was on my own, give or take. And the guy who I was working for, who seemed so nice, wasn't so nice. So it turned into a real kind of full-on experience. But I did it for a year and a half and I learned so much. It was such an intensive sort of experience. But I came back to London because I couldn't take the bus anymore, kind of thing, and was immediately offered a job back at University in London in the production department. And the production department basically is the team of people who gets records actually made, and they get the artwork together, they get the album tapes in, they send those to a factory, and they make sure it all gets pressed up and everything's cool and there are no problems. So that was a year of doing something different, but learning so much. And all of the experience I got there informs what I do now every day and has been invaluable ever since. And then from there, I kind of just got back into catalogue. So working in the international catalogue department at Universal, and they'd start me out working on kind of small artists and small records and things like that. And then as I went along, kind of started dealing with bigger stuff. And then I was dubbed head of international catalogue. And that was my first 9-year stint at Universal. But a couple of kind of macro level things that happened is on the 1st of January 99, Universal bought Polygram, which was the biggest record company in its day. So Universal then became the biggest record company. So the very start of my career was at a time of corporate takeover, restructuring, loads of people losing their jobs. And that's kind of been a theme in the industry ever since. It also coincided 6 months later with the launch of Napster, which for those of you who perhaps don't know, the internet was probably 3 or 4 years old in a mainstream sense at that point. And Napster was this brand new technology that meant people could rip CDs and put this music on a P2P, peer-to-peer platform and basically share music for free. And that completely broke down the whole record company model of, we're going to charge you £15 for a CD, because people just started to stop buying music and start downloading it. But anyway, more on that later. But in my time at Universal then, really, I got to go to a different country. I got to work in different departments. And really, I recognized now I was doing an apprenticeship and building skills and experience. And I kind of had increasing experience of restructurings and having new bosses and at the end there, I really got to a point where I just felt, well, it's time to move on and do something different. And I was very lucky because magically the doors opened in terms of an opportunity. EMI were headhunting, and I was offered a role of vice president of international catalogue over there. And as it happened, 6 months later, a private equity company called Terra Firma bought EMI, and there was loads of restructuring. And a third of the workforce was made redundant overnight worldwide. So something like 1,500 people lost their jobs. And through that time, I had 7 bosses in 6 years. And I don't mean to paint a dark landscape of the record business or anything, but all of this stuff goes on, and it's, for anyone who's interested in getting in there, it's kind of important to know about this stuff, I think, and going with your eyes wide open. But during my 6 years with EMI and all of this craziness, I had a kind of really phenomenal time and just professionally building experience. And the difference between my time at EMI and at Universal previously is I was able to get really close to some really important artists and artist management, management teams. So I was working on the Beatles, working on Pink Floyd, David Bowie, Iron Maiden, and a bunch of others. Radiohead left during that time. The Rolling Stones left EMI during that time. Queen left during that time. But I'm working on Queen again now. I went on to do other stuff with the Beatles, after I left EMI. But it was amazing because it put me in a room with really serious people who've worked in the business for decades and who've seen it all and done it all. And that was absolutely invaluable. And I also learned some really important lessons, like that other people at record companies I didn't see doing at the time, which is it's a really good idea to tell the truth to the artist and their manager. It's really good to be transparent. It's really good to think of them as a partner and to remember that actually you work for them. In the end, even though you work for a record company, you work for them. And they know more about their music and their catalogue and their fans than I'll ever know. And the other thing that I really learned at EMI was, and this was part of working at a company that had a private equity takeover, is they were really just happy to be transparent with all of the financials and to let everyone understand where the money went and how it flowed, because if we all understood that, we'd be able to do our jobs better, which is not the kind of culture that existed at other record companies at the time. So that was really important. But then at the end of 2012, the private equity guys had been pushed out by the bank who'd taken over EMI, and they were just looking to sell. And then up stepped Universal and Warner Music, who between them bought what was EMI. And I thought I'd be out on my ear. And so I was beginning to consider going independent and being a consultant. And then I ran into an old friend of mine who I'd worked with previously at Universal, who was now getting quite senior there. And he was like, hey, let's come and get the band back together. So in 2013, I moved back to Universal International Catalogue, which was kind of amazing because when I went back to Universal, I saw so many people that I knew from when I'd left in 2007, and they were all sitting at the same desks. They were all doing kind of the same jobs. And in my crazy time on the roller coaster at EMI, I felt like I'd got even though it'd been 7 years or 6 years, I'd probably got 20 years worth of experience in that time. So Universal bought EMI and there was more restructuring and all that stuff. But I realized that actually my skills and my outlook were very unique in that environment. And I was kind of, I guess, thinking, well, I probably don't have anywhere upwards to go within Universal. But so I'll just wait it out. And 3 years later, I was offered redundancy, which I took with a smile. And I took the check because I'd already sort of spent 3 years thinking about what I'd do when I went out and set up on my own. And that's how I got to be in catalog music consulting. So just to give you an idea of really what I do, for Universal, I look after Cat Stevens and Queen. And for Warner Music, I look after Prince and Led Zeppelin, and to a lesser extent, Neil Young. And so really what I do, certainly for the Cat Stevens and Queen and Prince, is I help artist managers realize their artistic vision in managing those catalogs, and just, reissues, making sure that their catalog is in a healthy state and that basically any problems they have get solved. So that could be a huge, enormous catalog reissue box set, down to the digital cover on Spotify doesn't look quite right, can we get it fixed? And for Led Zeppelin, slightly differently than that, I act as a liaison between the band and their representatives and the record company. So I'm kind of the funnel through which communication goes, and I've gotten pulled into a bit more of it from there, but it's been an amazing thing. And I had the privilege of having to have an interview with Robert Plant and Jimmy Page, which was, I can't tell you how frightening. And they sat there and Robert Plant said, "So what have you worked on?" And as I kind of reeled off all the things that I'd done, which sound impressive when my friends ask, it didn't feel very impressive in front of Robert Plant. God bless him. So for me, I remember being told about, in the marketing world, marketing agencies, advertising agencies always apply the 4 Ps, which is product, pricing, placement, promotion. And as someone in a record company, that sounded ridiculous to me. And now I realize it's absolutely genius. That is like truth for anything when it comes to album reissues or music releases. And so when I apply music industry experience to that, I get my product right by focusing on the A&R, so knowing the music, knowing the recordings, understanding the artist and who and what they were at the time, thinking about the fans who are going to buy it, thinking about collectors who are going to want it, and all the different things that they'll want in that. Pricing is obviously key. So when we do a big album reissue, we'll have multiple formats. So something that you can buy for 10, 15, 20 pounds, something you can buy for 30, 40 pounds, and then something that someone who's got 80, 100, 200 pounds, whatever, can throw at it. Placement, in terms of placement, I've got, each of these formats gives me a different story to tell. So I've got box sets, which is the book-on full in-depth deep dive. But vinyl's super hot right now, and people are, buying up vinyl plenty. And then of course there's the digital space, whether it's streaming services, whether it's YouTube, whether it's podcasting, all of that stuff. And then in terms of promotion, to boil it down to the simple terms, it's just about the story. And for me, the 2 most important things are if I've got my product right and I know the story I'm telling. Because as long as I'm telling a story that's fresh, it's a new angle, like it's ridiculous that you can tell a fresh story about the Beatles or about Led Zeppelin and a record they recorded 50 years ago, but you really can. So that's a huge part of it. And really, in simplistic terms, that's a big part of album reissues. And then what I do as a consultant is offer a sort of top to bottom service in terms of helping people release products. I'm pretty good with dealing with artist managers, which is handy for record companies because they can just outsource that. I'm pretty good with dealing with record companies and understanding how they're structured, which is pretty handy for artist managers because they like just dealing with one person and not having to talk to the guy in legal and the lady in production and the person in marketing and the other person in international. They just want one person to do it for them. And through my experience, I also get the whole idea of the worldwide market, the key territories that make up real record sales. If you don't know, the US is the #1 market in the world, Japan's #2, UK's #3, Germany 4, France 5, and so on. So knowing your markets and what their specific requirements are for things is really key. And then all I'm looking to do is make sure that there are no problems. And if there are, we deal with them quickly. We've got high quality products that everyone can be proud of. We're delivering the artist's vision, because keeping the artist happy is everything. And without meaning to sound too cynical, as long as the record company is selling records and making money and fans are happy, they're looking good. So there you go, it's easy. So I thought it'd be useful just to give you a quick look at one album reissue in depth to give you a sense of what that all is. And funnily enough, my old favorite record that I bought the week before I went to King's, I got to do a whole reissue on, which was really crazy in many ways. But if you don't know this album, I strongly recommend it. But here's a little something we can all watch, and I'll pick up after this. So there you go. If you haven't bought a copy, I thoroughly recommend it. So that was arguably Prince's greatest album. And the concept was, obviously, this is the first time it's been reissued. And I say obviously, but it's not. But basically, every other artist, more or less, has reissued their catalogue before, and Prince never had. So this was a big deal. It had 92 audio tracks in it, of which 63 were previously unreleased. And I can't tell you how big a deal that is. And of those 63, 46 were studio recordings, were original songs. Only Prince can do this. Like, Prince recorded a song every day at this point in his life, and he was just shelving them. They were amazing, and he's just putting them on the shelf because they don't quite work. And the next day he walks in and writes and just records a whole new song. And it was a level of musical genius that is unparalleled, literally unparalleled. So we had 46 previously unreleased studio tracks, which is like having 4 Prince albums that have never been out before in this box set. Plus we had a whole live audio concert, plus we had a whole other concert on DVD. So from a fan point of view, this is absolute gold. We had all the different formats, like I said before, so we're hitting lots of different kind of fan types, from people who want to buy a huge box set for £100, vinyl lovers, the whole thing, down to you just want to get the album itself. And we're telling a really exciting story if you're a Prince fan, which gives you a look behind the curtain, helps you get to know Prince better. And he was super enigmatic in his day. He never did interviews. And the content obviously is like a treasure trove. So to promote it, we got former bandmates, people who knew him, his former fiance, all able to talk about their experience at that time and working with him. We launched a podcast series, which won a Webby, which I also very much recommend, which is imaginatively called Prince Sign of the Times, the podcast. You can check that out at any good podcast platform near you. We did a YouTube broadcast of the gig that was on the DVD. So that was available 72 hours. So that was right kind of 6 months into COVID and lockdown, and YouTube were just doing loads of artist concerts kind of for 72-hour windows. So we jumped onto that. And obviously there was a marketing campaign and socials and all that. And then in terms of results, it made a load of money. We got 5-star reviews, and we've got a Grammy Award nomination, and we'll find out whether we're winning it in April, I think. So that went well. So that was the Prince Sign of the Times thing, but it gives you a very brief, quick flash into the things we do there. So for anyone thinking of treading the record industry or record company path, I just thought I'd jot down a few words of wisdom, which was, there's that great quote, and I don't know who said it, but do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. And I found that to be total. I was really lucky. There was only one thing that I wanted to do, and that was be in music somehow, and I blagged it. And there have been some tough days at the office, but I mean, I love it. I still love it. It's great. I can't stress how important it is to me, and I think it should be to everyone, to always be learning. And the day you're not learning, you need to switch it up and do something else. I've seen lots of people and it's not true of just music, but generally, you just do the same thing day in, day out forever. And well, for me anyway, I couldn't deal with that. So I think always being in a place where you're learning and you're developing yourself is really important. And you'll have heard me talk about restructurings and corporate takeovers and all of that. And looking back, it gave me a chance to evolve, to adapt, and to embrace change. And I now believe that change is so important, and it's a really positive thing. I really think change is good. And if you can just jump on it and roll with it, it just makes you a bigger and stronger person and professional. It took me a long time to realize that my experience and my skills are unique, as is everyone's. You know, no two people do the same thing the same way. And it's learning, it's, I guess, really realizing that and learning and figuring out how you can make the most out of your unique experience and skill set that certainly helped me to do what I do. And finally, the first words of advice I was given when I got into a record company was, whatever you do, just be a safe pair of hands. And no truer words have been said to me, you know. Just be the person that if someone calls you, they know that you're going to get that thing done. There aren't going to be any problems. And I mean, it's simple and it's obvious, I guess, but for a lot of people, not so simple or obvious. And then very finally, I thought I'd make it look like I knew something. And I found this on the internet ages ago, and it's just really seems suited to this. So as you can see on your screen, it's the Japanese concept of ikigai. He said, mispronouncing that horribly, and apologies to any Japanese listeners out there. But it's this wonderful theory about the balance of the thing you love, the thing you're good at, the skills you have to offer and that you can be paid for, and kind of what makes the world a better place. And if you can achieve that level of Zen, then I guess you have truly achieved ikigai. So there you go. That's where I'm going to drop the mic, Louis. So back over to you in the studio.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting insight to the music industry and actually what you do as a whole. I love the fact that you worked on Prince's Reissue when that was one of your favorite albums. I can't imagine how good that must have felt.
It felt pretty good, let me tell you.
One of the first questions we have is from Georgina Lapsley, asking, what are your views on the recent surge in artists such as Bruce Springsteen selling their music catalogue?
Yeah, I mean, if someone came up and offered me $250 million for my music catalogue, I'd take it. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it's the right thing for these artists to do, for them, for their families, for where they are in terms of their careers. You know, you look at Dylan or Springsteen or whoever, they've done their thing in terms of songwriting, they've done their thing in terms of recording, they've done their thing in terms of touring. And these guys and girls are in their 60s, 70s, and some, you know, older than that. If you're going to cash in those chips, now's the time. So yeah, I think it's the right thing. I think it's then on people like me and on people like me who work at record companies to manage those catalogues responsibly and properly. I hope not to see Bob Dylan or Bruce Springsteen or whoever's music, you know, just on McDonald's ads or whatever else. But I think there are certain artists for whom actually it will really be a plus for fans, because some artists have been very reluctant to really let all their stuff out there in a meaningful way, or have chosen a way to do it maybe that might not have suited them as well as they could have done. So yeah, as with all things, I'm sure there'll be a balance, and there'll be some stuff that's abused and some stuff that's done brilliantly. So it'll be exciting.
Yeah. And I guess actually a question I wanted to ask off kind of the back of that, I guess, in complete opposite, is what are your opinions on the recent whole Spotify drama with Joni Mitchell removing their work, or I guess a large majority of their discography off the platform?
Well, I'm not going to tell Neil Young or Joni Mitchell that they're wrong. And like I said before, they and others like them know infinitely more about things than I ever will. I think it's great. I really do. I think music used to be, and certainly that generation of musician, their music was about something. Their music was about social change in a lot of instances anyway. Musicians used to step up to the plate when something was going wrong in the world and call it out or do something. And it's not something that I feel I see as much anymore in the younger generations of musicians. You don't see, I'm not aware of that many politically charged lyrics anymore, certainly in mainstream music, but I feel like you used to get it more. So I think it's really good. And I'm sure Spotify won't be too bothered. But hopefully it'll turn into a bit of a bad PR look for them, and they'll have to figure it out. And hopefully people will have Mr. Young and Ms. Mitchell's tunes back on streaming services at some point in the not too distant future.
Well, that actually leads us quite well into our next question from Andrew McFall. He says, "Thank you so much for talking to us tonight on a subject which is close to my heart. I may be a boring maths teacher, but I'm the nephew of the owner of Liverpool's Cabin Club and the son of the former financial director of EMI Records. When I was a student, I immediately bought every vinyl LP by the Smiths. Nowadays, I simply subscribe to Amazon and Apple Music. Is this good for artists and or consumers? And has the industry moved on for the better for artists, promoters and consumers?"
It's a very interesting question. And if I knew the answer to that, I'd be a very rich man, I'm sure. But I think it's really interesting. I think, was it Andrew? Sorry. I think, Andrew, you've asked a really interesting question, and you've touched on live, and you've touched on physical, and you've touched on digital. And those are really, along with merchandising and stuff like that, or licensing, some of the areas, the big main areas that an artist has to make their money. And once upon a time, it was the tour was there to promote the album. And then more recently, the album's been there just to justify the tour. And then with streaming, it's tricky. I think for the Sheerans and the Swifts, streaming. And that's certainly not the only place they're making their money. And those guys are killing it on tour as well. But streaming's their thing, and that's how they interact with their fans most of all. I think the Beatles or the Stones or, Floyd or Prince or Led Zeppelin, I mean, those guys are multi-gajillionaires many times over. And so in a way, it kind of doesn't make any difference to their bottom line. But physical is still a huge, when it comes to recorded music, physical is still a place that makes a lot of money for those guys. And ultimately, streaming royalties are very slim. So I think it's being a music artist today, if you were starting out, it's tough. But then again, it was tough in the Beatles' day, and the Beatles started out on a 1% royalty rate. No one gets signed to a 1% royalty rate today. Even the most cynical record company executive couldn't even think of doing that, I'm sure. But they were on 1%. So I think it's easy to think that times are tougher now than they were then, but they were tough then as well. And I think it's just, I'm veering away from the question, aren't I? But it's always been a very low percentage success rate, being a recorded music artist. So I think artists, if they're well represented, they've got good management, and they're smart, they'll always figure it out. As long as, I mean, I remember speaking to a guy who's one of the legends of A&R that I ever met, and he said it all comes down to one thing, which is the songs. And if your songs are good, it'll all be fine.
So I guess aside from the artist, then has the change from kind of hard CD and vinyl to digital streaming, has that affected your kind of workflow or what you do at all?
You'd think, wouldn't you? But no, because what it turns out is that for my generation and the generation older than me, we all got into music and we were all used to pulling a record off a shelf or a CD. And that's how we interact with music, and that's how we understand music. And we think about music, or a lot of us, in terms of albums. And from what I'm told, the younger generation, such as your good self, Louis, maybe not you personally, of course, but those of your age group, apparently the album's dead to your generation, I'm told, which seems ridiculous to me, because for the artist, albums were meaningful, and therefore they're meaningful to the rest of us.
Yeah, I wouldn't say, I'd say the album is very much still alive. I guess we have more singles get released. There's a little build up to a long process of building up to the album nowadays, but I would very much say the album is still.
Well, I think there's a myth in music industry circles about how this young generation, you know, it's all about making their own playlists, and so albums, and it's all so. But that's, if you'll pardon my industry vernacular, bullshit, because like you go back to the 50s and it was all singles. It was all pop songs on the radio. So a very wise friend of mine and a King's alumnus, Mike Gillespie, who manages Underworld no less, once told me that the music industry and the record industry particularly is like a goldfish in its bowl. And once it's swum around one full revolution, it's forgotten everything that just happened, you know. And there's so much truth to that. And it's all very cyclical, I think. And so, yeah, I don't know. I kind of think it's ever been thus one way or another.
Yeah. Okay, next question is from Toby, you're a Big Bay. And he asks, were you at all involved in Neil Young selling his catalogue, and what happens in terms of the company who's bought it?
Yeah, so I had nothing to do with Mr. Young selling his catalogue, I hasten to add. But Mr. Young sold his catalogue to Hypnosis, which is fronted by Mert Mercuriadis and Nile Rodgers, no less. And those two gentlemen with whom I have had the pleasure of working on Chic, they're brilliant because they sat there and they thought for decades, for years and decades, the financial market has failed to see music as an asset class that will give you a bankable return. And it does. And you saw me quote a number of 15 billion for the three major record companies' revenue for 2020. That's bankable. And record company profits were shaken in the late 70s when there was an oil crisis, because you need oil to make vinyl. And when the price of oil went through the roof, it was tough to make vinyl. And so they stopped selling records so much. When CD came in, the record companies were coining it because everyone had to go and buy their record collections on CD, which was more expensive. And then when digital happened, for 10 years, it looked like everything was in real trouble there, because suddenly everybody wants it for free and they're not paying. But Merck and Nile are right. It's bankable and it's returnable and you can predict it. And if you work it and you're smart, you're going to get a return every year. And so I think what they've done with Hypnosis is really smart. Neil Young's cashed out at a time in life where everybody cashes out, right? Everyone retires at some point and everyone wants a nice little nest egg. Mr. Young has a very nice nest egg. And his grandchildren's grandchildren will be well taken care of, I'm sure, you know. And so I'm all for it. And I think he's signed to Hypnosis as, or I say signed, he's sold his rights to Hypnosis as others have, because Merck and Nile give them confidence that they can give those rights to those guys and that their legacy will be well looked after. So I think it's smart. And I think if you look at other instances where an artist passes away, and I don't want to name names, but some artists have passed away without a will, and their some or many children have then fought, sometimes in court, over the rights to that catalogue and that legacy. And it's then been managed in a way that one might say was not optimal. And at least this way, Mr. Young and others' recorded music legacy is being passed over to professionals who know what they're doing with it. So yeah, I'm not going to tell Neil Young that he's made a bad choice, of course. But I think there's a great deal of logic to it, and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Okay, quite an intense next question from Mr. McFall. Taking Amy Winehouse, of whom I'm a great fan, did the music industry kill her, or would she have died anyway?
No, I don't think the music industry killed her. I think it maybe could have done more to help in hindsight, but I don't think at the time it was possible to help her, because at the end of the day, and I didn't know her, although she used to drink at my local pub, and so you'd see her there, like around the time of the jazz, of the Frank album. And then I remember running into her at Universal Music post Back to Black, and she must have been 3 stone lighter, and she was about 5 foot tall. And she was very nice and all that stuff when I met her, but you could tell that she wasn't well. And security had to kick down a toilet door later that afternoon because she'd been smoking heroin in there, and they had to pull her out of there. And she wasn't well. She was an addict, sadly, from what little I know. And so what could the record industry do? I mean, or what could Universal do? I mean, I was at EMI at the time, and someone who I worked with was married to her then manager. And he was trying his best to get all the help they possibly could. Her family were trying to get her all the help they could. But how do you stop an addict being an addict? They're the only ones who have the power to get out of that hole. And I think the problem is if you take someone who's got an addiction like that and you throw in the whole pressure of fame and success, you've instantly made it many orders of magnitude harder for them to find a way out. But I'm talking about this like I know anything about it, and I don't know anything about actual addiction. So what do I know? But
it's a difficult one, that one. Next question from George, which I would also quite like to know the answer to. What's your best piece of advice for getting started in the music industry as a music artist?
Something I should have said in my words of advice is that in my 25 years at record companies, I've only ever been to 2 retirement parties. And one of them was for a CEO. I guess if you want to be a musician, I think there are 2 roads for musicians. You're either going to be a professional musician who plays for other artists. You're going to be a session player or what have you, in which case you need to practice about 23.5 hours a day. You need to be crazy good. And there aren't many musicians who have that level of skill. But if you do, all power to you. And if you've got the technique, I'm sure you can find success. You'll need a break, you'll need a manager, all of that stuff. But when you see musicians who are truly technically gifted, everyone wants to work with them. I think if you want to be a musician, like being in a band musician, you and your band have to work hard. And I think if you look at U2, and it was a model that Coldplay emulated, those guys split all the money 4 ways, or in fact 5 ways, with the manager. And they immediately removed, in doing that, the main reason that most bands split up, which is the inequity of who gets the most money. And I think bands who do that are very smart, because they're investing in their long-term future and success and longevity. But like I said as well earlier, I think it's all about songs. You've got to know how to kick other musicians' ass live on a stage as well, for sure. But I think songs and really getting your songs to a place where there's no fat on them, and they, you know, you've got to be super smart with song structure and how you do it, and how you, the instrumentation, the recording. But by the same token, I think Prince teaches another good lesson where famously musicians he worked with were amazed that they'd walk in a studio with him and they'd be used to other artists taking hours getting everything set up just right, sounding perfect. And Prince would just be like, don't worry about that, just hit record and play. And if you play from the heart, it's going to be good.
Yeah.
So there are some very contradicting words of advice from a failed musician.
Our next question is from Toby, who's actually going to ask on live. So Toby, if you'd like to answer.
Hi,
Hi, Toby.
happy to speak to you today. I'm glad you came. Just wanted to ask again about, like, in terms of being creative in the industry. Like, I feel like the industry's changed a lot, and a piece of advice I've heard quite a lot is like, oh, you know, everyone's just an email away, and you hear all these stories of people just like walking into record labels and putting their, you know, demos on the table and getting signed and all that. And is that still a realistic, like, way of getting into the industry, or do you think there's something else that we should be in to do?
I don't think it was ever a realistic way of getting into the industry, really. I remember talking to A&R guys who had 1,000 tapes sitting in their office, unlistened to, that people had sent in. No one wanted to sign the Beatles. Do you know what I mean? And George Martin took a punt on them. So, I mean, I think, like I said, it's a really low percentage thing, which is brutal, but it's kind of like that everywhere, really, isn't it? I mean, how many people get to play for Manchester City or whatever, you know? But I think there are some things which seem obvious and silly, but, you know, yeah, everyone's an email away, but just because you can get an email into my inbox doesn't mean I'm going to read it, and it doesn't mean I'm going to respond to it, you know? Yeah. And I know people at record companies who are buried in meetings all day, who are getting 500 or 600 emails in a day. They're not able to reply to emails from their boss, let alone emails from people they don't know. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I know artist managers who bemoan the fact that people from the record company don't get back to them, which is great for me because that means I get work. But I don't, you know, it's tough. And I think to get into a record company, you almost kind of want to find a circuitous route in. So back in my day, I remember I went to a temp agency, and the BBC wanted someone to come in and, I don't know, do spreadsheets for them for a week or something. It was so boring. But on my CV, it said I was in the BBC for a week or 2 weeks or something. And oh, look, the BBC's, if you say the letters BBC to someone in music or whatever, they're like, oh, you worked at the BBC. Sure, you can come and work in my post room for a week or whatever for free. And then you do enough of those gigs as I did, and I went through like a couple of music PR firms and stuff like that, and then through there you're speaking to people from labels suddenly, because you're the person who's sending them that press folder or whatever it is, and kind of, you know, one door opens, and, you know, I don't know, I kind of find like that was the opportunity. But if I just walked up to the front door of a record company and said, here's my CV, I mean, I didn't walk up, but I sent all the record companies my CV, never heard anything.
Yeah.
So I think it's, you know, it's kind of doing stuff like that, of just finding a different way to kind of get to those guys. But it's a tough one. But I do think, actually, just to that point, I know from my time at record companies that HR departments would more and more and more put forward people from school or university who had expressed some kind of interest, and they were interested in getting kind of younger applicants in, probably because they were cheaper, if I can be so cynical. But certainly when I was a VP at a record company, I'd be much more interested in getting someone in who knew something about music or was passionate about music. And I had Oxbridge graduates walk in who, I don't know why they were there. I don't know if they knew why they were there, but they didn't display any interest in music. And so I wasn't interested in them. But when someone walked in and could talk to me for 20 minutes about why the blues was so important, I was like, you've got a gig, come on in. I apologize, Toby, because I haven't really helped you with that, but
No, don't worry. It was informative.
But I don't know whether you, well, Toby can't. I don't know whether, Toby, you have a specific niche of music that you're really into, or a part of the business that you're really hoping to get into, but.
I mean, personally, I was just kind of asking because I was curious, but I want to be a musician, so really, I record my own music and release it at the minute, and kind of want to try and make a living off of that long term. But
I mean, people do, and you know, certainly in the last 10 years, DIY music has become a real thing, and I think the artists who've really done it have learned to blend recording their own songs, who are learning to promote their own songs online through YouTube, socials, what have you, but they're blending that with kind of a real sort of multi-level business plan.
yeah,
Whether it's merch, it's building, you know, your network in terms of in your local area, where can you go and gig, where can you go and perform, where can you go and start building a fan base, and how can you just talk to that fan base directly? Because I'm not saying it's easy, and record companies do perform a very vital task, but it is possible through technology these days to do it yourself. I mean,
yeah,
if you're good enough, you can record everything on your laptop. You can distribute everything through your laptop. You can speak to your fan base through your laptop, your mobile, all of that stuff. And so it's just performing live where you really need a physical space. And some artists, obviously through COVID, haven't even had to do that. So I think, as with all things, if you can dream it, you can do it. I think all of those artists who have made it have something in common, which is they've all worked their asses off, you know. And people talk about the 10,000 hours, but I think really to be really good, it's more like 20, 30, 40, 50. You know, you got to really put the time in, unless you're just disgustingly gifted, Toby, which maybe you are, in which case you're going to be fine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Toby. Unfortunately, we've only got time for a couple more, but Finn Cunningham asks, if you could put a name to the most influential artist or band in the music industry, who would it be?
Objectively most influential, or on me?
I think on you probably, or I mean both. What the industry thinks, what you think.
Objectively, I'm going to have to just be boring and say the Beatles, I think, because I think so many artists who've been so important, say the Beatles, and they themselves have been influenced by the Beatles. But then you go to the Beatles and you say, who was their influence? It was Motown Records, it was blues musicians, it was, you know, you look at Zeppelin, you go all the way back to like Delta blues musicians who I've never heard of. But yeah, I'll be boring and say the Beatles. And then in terms of mine, I don't know. I mean, Prince is a big one for me. But you know, there are too many, and that's the joy of music. Is you could listen to something you haven't heard of every day, and till the day you die, there'd still be too much to listen to.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I agree with that. Our final question then. It's an interesting one from Gavin Merriweather. What is the best live gig you've ever been to?
Amazing question. I have thought about this previously. Top 3 gigs of all time. I have a joint first place, which is Prince at the O2 in his 21 night stand there. I was 3 rows from the front of the stage and it was epic. Joint first place, The Roots at the Jazz Cafe. And it was amazing. There were just 500 people bouncing for 2 hours. And I've never seen a level of musicianship like that. Crazy.
Mm.
There were professional musicians in the room who were just wilting and looking very sheepish. And number 3, my old friend Ruth Kane is, I believe, or was joining this call, and she and I went to see Björk at the Union Chapel, and it was Björk and the Brodsky Quartet, and there was no amplification. It was a string quartet and Björk, and she just sang with no microphone or anything. And it was epic. So I'm cheating by giving you 3 gigs instead of 1, but that's what you get.
Giancarlo, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure having you on. That was honestly very, very fascinating. I'm going to pass back to Mr. Hunter now to finish things off. Yeah, thank you very much.
Cheers, Louis. Thank you.
Thanks, Louis. I'm going to start by just thanking Louis so much just for being so relaxed and how you just managed to interview Giancarlo so effortlessly and asked so many wonderful questions. That what's your favourite gig, best gig you've ever been to? I've been mulling that over since I came up. Thanks, Gavin, for writing that, because I've been thinking about that. It's a really, really tough call, and I understand Giancarlo's difficulty there. Giancarlo, can I ask? Can you put your microphone back on? I just want to ask some quick fire questions for you. Here we go. You can manage one of the 2 back catalogues, okay? All right, so you're in charge of them. So here we go. Choose from Beatles, Rolling Stones.
Beatles.
We'll keep the easy ones. Blur, Oasis.
Whatever. Blur.
We'll go. I've got a few ones around. Whitney or Aretha.
Aretha.
Eminem or Run DMC.
Yeah, Run DMC, but Eminem's got chops for sure.
AC/DC or Metallica.
AC/DC.
The Eagles or ABBA.
Yeah. Pass. The Eagles, just by default. I product managed an ABBA thing, and I had to have a deal with the person at their label to say I do the proofreading, and they had to listen to it because it's just not my thing. Sorry.
That's all right. Jimi Hendrix or Eric Clapton.
Hendrix.
Floyd or Zeppelin.
Zeppelin. But it's close.
That's a massive call, I've got to say. U2 or REM.
It's not the cool answer, but I'm probably going to say U2.
No, it's not the cool answer. I love U2 as well, don't get me wrong. That's not the answer. Go on. Adele or Kylie.
Who? Sorry?
Adele or Kylie Minogue?
Yeah, Kylie, for sure.
CDs or LPs?
Yes, in equal measure. I think they each do their own thing. But LPs for sure look cool on a shelf.
Look, I think we'll probably leave it there. Oh, there's loads more we could go on to, and as we talked about in our pre-talk, we could easily sit here all night and talk music. But I just want to thank you so much, Giancarlo, for coming tonight, and Louis again for just leading with aplomb. You really have enriched us tonight and taken us on a musical journey of amazement. I'm in such awe. Oh, sorry, one more question. I really want to ask, the fandom sort of starstruck. Oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to say because I'm so nervous meeting these people. Was it just Robbie Plant and Jimmy Page? Or were there one or two others where you thought, I'm a bit nervous here about meeting these people?
I have a hard and fast rule usually of I don't want to meet my heroes. I just deal with their representatives, which is where I'm happy. But so yeah, I mean, I've met a few, but like actually having to sit down and be interviewed by Robert Plant and Jimmy Page was absolutely terrifying.
I want to leave it with recapping what you gave in your advice, because I don't think that is just music industry. I think that is for life. I think that's life advice, and superb life advice. And if you could advise or coach any of our young men and women at King's to say, do what you love as first and foremost, I would recommend that always ready to learn. Even though I'm teaching some fine young men and women here at King's, and I come in, I always know I'm coming in and I learn something new every day from them. And when you stop learning, well, you might as well stop living. Embrace change, I thought, was a wonderful one as well. And we've all had to do a lot of that recently. Don't undervalue yourself, and find your niche and find where you're really good at, and be a safe pair of hands. No one wants a loose cannon. I really do think it's all wonderful advice that transcends across all industries, all workplaces, and life in general. So thank you very much for sharing those with us. It was very, very appreciated. Once again, thank you, Louis. Giancarlo, you are more than welcome. Please come and visit us at King's in person. Would love you to. The music department. We'll get you an invite to the Fleetwood Mac concert with Louis later on in the year at King's Week. I hope I haven't let the cat out of the bag. We weren't supposed to say anything, but thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. It's been a real musical journey and a real pleasure. Thanks very much. Thanks, Giancarlo. Thank you very much, Louis.
I hope that's Peter Green Fleetwood Mac, Louis.
We've got a nice variety.
Nice. None of that Stevie Nicks stuff. Well done.
Cheers. Okay, have a good night. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys. Take it easy. Thank you.